individuals with trauma experience, and particularly we'll focus on our kids. And so the first part of what I'll be talking about is going to be a little bit academic, but it helps to understand. It helps to have a framework to understand what trauma is, what our kids experience. So, and I'm used to being able to control my slides, but Gina's back there, and she'll just kind of hit them for me. So I first, just a little bit about what we're going to talk about. We're going to define trauma. You can go ahead and hit the next slide, Gina. And we're going to talk about how trauma impacts how we see the world. We'll discuss what we can do as a church. I have a real heart to see us as the church, not just your church, but our church as a whole, to really come and make a difference for these families and for these children and for individuals who've experienced trauma. And then we're going to spend the latter part just talking about strategies that we can do here within our church. And we'll focus mostly on kids, but some of these strategies are things we can do as adults as well. Okay, next slide. So a little bit about me. I have 2 kids. I am an adoptive mom. I've adopted out of foster care. So what I'm talking about, I've lived, and have lived in a variety of ways. I will be telling stories about my children, and I have permission to tell those stories. So I would ask though that you don't go out in the community and spread. Oh yeah, you know what we heard, but they did say that I can share, and it's one of the things that we've really valued as a family, and you'll hear this as we talk. Sometimes we hold these things secret, and in holding them secret, we can't get healed, and God can't do his work. And so we've committed as a family to share some of our stories. There are still some things we don't, but because we want to see God be able to do his work in his church. So I have Rebecca and Reagan, and I'll just a couple of things. Reagan is in college now. She'll be starting at TCC. And Rebecca is a junior in high school, and both of them have walked a lot of the journey that we'll be talking about. Okay, so why should we have this conversation? More than 2/3 of children are reported to have at least one traumatic event. Many children have 4 or more traumatic events, and we'll talk about why that's important in just a minute. We know that 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of traumatic events at least once in their lives, and 8% have complex trauma. That means that they've experienced a variety of traumatic events. We also know that many families with children with trauma, because of some of the behaviors and some of the unique ways they need to parent them, do not go to church. Or if they go to church, they alternate, so they don't get to go to church as a family. And that's my heart. I think as a church, we can do, and again, I'm not saying, when I'm saying church and we, I'm talking about the church as a whole. We can do a better job, and we can really help these families come, because true healing, I believe, comes in relationship with Jesus and allowing Jesus to come and work in the hearts of these kids. There's a lot of things we can do clinically. There's a lot of things we can do because of what we know and helping the brain rewire, and we're going to talk about some of that. But really, a lot of that true healing comes in relationship with each other that leads us into relationship with God. All right, next slide. So this, you don't need to get all the details up here, but the top is what I really want to talk about. Today, my goal is for you to become more trauma aware and develop some trauma sensitivity. We talk about becoming trauma informed, and I know from talking with John and Gina and Rachel and Daisy, that's a goal for your church. But right now, we're just starting with becoming trauma aware and trauma sensitive. Trauma informed will be after you have things in place where you really can meet the needs and really have some strategies to move forward. But it starts with becoming more aware, knowing what we can do, becoming sensitive to some of these issues that these families and these kiddos deal with, and then reframing. I'll tell you, I've had to change what I've known about parenting by having these 2 kids. And I work a lot with foster families, And a lot of the families I work with, they're second generation, so it's a lot of foster parents that have raised their family, and now they're like, oh, we just loved being parents, so we're going to be foster parents. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I can't parent them the same way. Or their families, and they have their biological kids, and then they have foster kids, and they're like, oh no, now what do I do? Because the trauma brain functions differently, and so it changes how we have to parent, how we have to interact, what we need to do, what our priorities are. The good news is, out of all of this, a lot of the strategies that work well for kids or others who have what we will call, you'll hear me refer to the trauma brain a lot, because the trauma brain functions differently, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The strategies that help somebody get out of that trauma brain or be successful in navigating their world works for everybody, okay? And here's what's really, really cool. I was just sharing a book with Daisy. It's called The Anatomy of the Soul. It's all about how what we're learning, all the new neuroscience that we're learning, it is tied almost line for line with biblical principles. Healing from trauma comes from being in relationship, comes from being part of, what does the Bible tell us? We need to be in relationship, we need to be part of the body of Christ. And so learning some of these scriptural things and learning how to walk some of this out leads to healing for all of us. Okay, so what is trauma? These are just some definitions, but basically it's a distressing event, and often there's what PTSD and trauma that we all experience as adults, but then we have this new, it's fairly new phenomena that we're talking about of developmental trauma, where we're realizing that children who were in mom's tummy when mom had a very, very stressful pregnancy, and the distress and the stress hormones that they were receiving because mom was stressed, creates what we would call this trauma brain. They see the world differently. Kids that were exposed to drugs and alcohol in utero, kids that were born and in the NICU where there was all the bright lights and all the noises and all the sounds, kids who experienced certain types of trauma in the first few years of their life, we're really finding that's changing how their brain is wired and what their brain does. Okay. So it can be a result of abandonment and abuse and neglect. And often it can be unconscious. And so, again, what we're learning, some of the things we're learning in the neuro and the science world, I just kind of go, okay, God, you've been telling us about this a long time ago. So how many people have heard about the book, The Body Keeps the Score? Okay? So we're learning, oh, there's generational. So trauma can be passed down from generation to generation. What does the Bible tell us? That there's generational curses, there's generational patterns that God wants to break to bring healing to his people. So again, we're seeing a lot of this, and for me, I'm just like so excited. When I'm working with foster parents and I get the privilege of doing some training with them, often in conferences, and most of them are Christians, and I'm like, I can't imagine walking this journey without being a Christian, because we can pray, we can trust God to bring healing and keep going and keep moving forward. Okay, next slide. So when trauma occurs before birth or in the early stages of life, it affects the way the individual perceives the world, all right? And this is so important to understand. These kids see the world differently. These kids walk into this room and are immediately thinking, who's going to hurt me? What's negative that's going to happen? What's bad? They tend to view everything as a threat until it's proven otherwise. And that's why I think there's so much power in the church, because if we can understand that and we can show them the love of Christ, it can start bringing healing. This is not conscious, but it's subconscious. And it's to protect themselves. And so we have to be really mindful of some of their experiences. They come in primed for somebody's going to say something bad. And then you kind of look at them cross-eyed, and they're like, oh, yeah, see, I knew I was right. They don't like me. Oh, it's horrible. I'm no good. And they're all the way down that whole negative thought pattern. they don't know how to think with a positive intent. And so we're having to work to help with that. So my youngest was a gymnast. We had to stop gymnastics. Gymnastics was great for her for quite a while until she was like number 2 in the state and all of these things. And all of a sudden they want her in the gym for 30 hours. And then they're doing all the work. And coaches would say things things like, oh, Rebecca, when you hold your hands like that, it just hurts my eyes. She would come, I'd pick her up from the gym, and she would be devastated. I hurt my coach's eyes. I'm horrible. Because the other thing is with the trauma brain, they're very black and white. So we have to be very careful how we talk, or we have to help them understand. And I'd go, honey, you didn't really hurt their eyes. What they were saying, it's a saying. She's like, no. She said, I hurt her eyes. And so we'd have to talk. But the intensity of the training, we finally had to say, you know what, Boo, I know you love doing this, but we've got to step back because it's causing more trauma than all the movement, which she craves, helping her. So one of the things that families who have kids that are dealing with this, we're constantly having to think, okay, where can we bring them? What's a safe environment? If it's not safe, we're not going to bring them. Or if it's, or I'm going to be there to make sure that I can buffer and help interpret for them. And so again, as I just love hearing Rachel's heart, and a lot of our talking has been, what can we do so this becomes a safe place? So families can come into a church and know, oh yeah, we can be here because people understand. And we can be here because we know how to communicate and help. Okay. So there was a large study, and this is, again, I promise I'm going to do a couple of the heady things because I think it helps to understand some of this, and then we're going to talk, a lot of what we can do about it. There's a large study. How many people have heard of the ACEs study? Okay. Some of you may have even filled out as adverse childhood experiences. Some of you may even have been to your healthcare provider. They had you fill out an ACEs questionnaire. You might not even have been aware of what it's about. But in this study, they linked adverse childhood experiences to future health or to appropriate behaviors that lead to good health or bad health. And so what they found is children who had the higher number of adverse childhood experiences that you experience, the more likely you would end up with an autoimmune disorder, obesity, or eating disorders, and a whole variety of others. You can just see the list there. I'll make these slides available to Rachel, and she can share them with you. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we know is that if you've had these adverse childhood experiences, that you are more likely to have some disease or disability, social problems, or early death. What we don't know yet is the middle two, the social, emotional, cognitive impairment, or the adoption of high-risk behaviors. We don't know the links of that scientifically. But for me, as a church and as a Christian, that's then where we can help, right? We can help them have a correct worldview, help them maybe get out of some of that negative intent and start to see things more positively, so that we don't end up at that point where we have more disease or disability. Okay. All right, really quick, the 5 Bs of trauma, and this is helpful to think about. One is the brain. It creates an imbalance between what we call your downstairs brain and your upstairs brain. So your downstairs brain is there to protect you. So remember what I said about the kids or individuals, even adults. These are adults who've experienced trauma or complex trauma, the same type of thing. They'll walk in a room like this and they're immediately like, am I safe? Where am I safe? How am I safe? Where should I position myself? All of those types of things. Because your downstairs brain, and I'm going to use my hand because it really helps to think about this, it's there to protect you. Your downstairs, the whole purpose of your downstairs brain is to keep you safe. So that's where you hear the fight, flight, freeze, and then there's a new one called fawn. And what those are is If you don't feel safe, you will fight, you'll flight, or you freeze, or fawn is when you try and just make somebody really like you. You're just going to do whatever you can so that they'll like you. If you don't feel safe, that's where you are, and it's not something you necessarily think about, right? How many of you have been like startled and you reacted? Anybody been startled and you hit somebody, right? And they're like, what? Why'd you hit me? You didn't even think about it, right? Or anybody been startled and you immediately go into a fetal position on the floor, right? You just kind of curl up. That's because that brain says, danger, you need to be safe. Then we have a thing in our brain called our amygdala. You can think about that as your thumb. It's right there in the middle, and it regulates between that downstairs brain and your upstairs brain. Your upstairs brain is your thinking brain. It's your cortex. It's how you can handle your emotions. It's where you can go, I came in here and I saw Heather from a distance, and boy, she should have seen me and she should have come up and said hi, because we haven't seen each other for a year and a half. But she really doesn't like me. This just proves that right? That's somebody with a trauma, we laugh, but somebody with a trauma brain, that's where they would go. Right? I can go, I've looked a couple times. I wanted to go say hi to her, but she was busy or she was getting food. That amygdala allows you to regulate that so your upstairs brain stays engaged. And I can go, you know what? When I'm done, I'm going to still get to go up and say hi to her. And she still likes me, right? What, don't you? Right? You still like me. So... right? But when you have the trauma brain, and if that amygdala is not working, you walk around with what we call the flipped lid. And so you can't think. And so think about this. That means if the kid's lid is flipped, they can't think, they can't hear what you're saying in Sunday school. Or they can't receive what God wants to do in worship. Or all of those things. So when we get to some of the strategies, we're going to talk a lot about how to keep that amygdala working so that the upstairs brain stays engaged, and so that the child then is able to think or be able to do things. So brain is a big part of this, and we're learning more and more and more neurologically. And so our goal is that you want to still have that downstairs brain. We want that to be a foundation, but we don't want it to be so big that it takes over all of their thinking. Then there's the biology. Really quick biology. We do know now, I talked about the body keeps the score, that there really is some biological effects to trauma. And it's at the cellular level. When you think about how God has made our body, it's just incredible. And so being able to think about, and hopefully some of this will help those of you guys who are intercessors or prayer warriors. These are things you can be praying. God, heal from the cellular all the way. Touch every little bit of their body, trusting God to really bring a change for these kids. When I got the phone call for Reagan, my oldest, and I hadn't really told anybody that I was thinking about adopting. I just kind of kept it on the low key, and had been going through some processes and praying about it. I hadn't really said a whole bunch at work. I get this phone call, and I'm like, oh shoot, this could really happen. And then I was like, I really don't like her name. This must not be God. And so then I was trying to call a couple friends. Nobody, right? I'm like calling my friends to tell them about this. Nobody's available. I'm like, seriously, Lord? How am I supposed to get godly wisdom? He's like, you pray. I'm like, but no, I think I want to talk. He goes, first you're going to pray, and I want you to go look up what her name means. Reagan Renee, nobility redeemed. And God immediately started speaking that he was going to change the generation. From her generation on, he's changing what he's going to do in her family. Okay? And I was like, okay, Lord. And now here's a whole bunch of other pieces to this story. I got the phone call 5 days before I went on a 9-month sabbatical. So I got to be home with her for the first 9 months of her life, paid by the university, right? I sent the dean an email, said, I'm studying, just change my sabbatical plan, I'm studying child development, by the way, with my new baby. So, all of those kinds of things. But God, just all the things that he did. So God has a plan. God has a desire. Did he want the trauma to happen? No. Did he want her to not be able to be part of her biological family? No. But they couldn't keep her safe. And I could tell you the whole story. It was a 2-year journey for her to get to her adoption, with lots of ups and downs, and that's a whole nother story, but I'll be happy to share it if you want it sometime. Okay, so brain, biology, behavior. And this is a big one, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about this when we talk about some strategies. Because that amygdala doesn't always work well, or they need other strategies to support that amygdala. As you flip your lid, your behavior changes because you're in that downstairs brain. And it can look really cute sometimes when they're younger, and then as they get older, it becomes more and more challenging. And we have to figure out some strategies to help support some of those behaviors. A number of years ago, I got to start being part of kids camp with John and Gina, and it has been so fun. Last year, we had a couple kids there on the spectrum, a couple kids there with some behaviors that probably 5-6 years ago, wouldn't you say, John, would have probably been sent home. They made it the whole time through kids camp. That's our goal. That's my heart. And that's what we want to see. And I've seen so many of these kids, some of them that I worked with, that were part of our Foursquare kids camp that got sent home, that now aren't walking with the Lord at all. We want to make a difference. We want them to hear and see and be able to have experiences. So we want to bring supports into place. It alters how we experience the world with our body. And again, we'll talk about some strategies for that. And then our beliefs. These kids, no matter how much they're told, I love you, you're great, they can have a negative self-concept. And so we want to help build that and help them change their beliefs, change their self-talk. And with my Rebecca, and if she was here, she said she would have showed these to you. We're doing tons of these. She has a whole bunch of bracelets, and they on the bracelets are words like strength, mysterious, what else is she? Hope, compassionate. So she's been making bracelets. We sat down, we brainstormed, who is she? Who does God say she is? What are her strengths? And she's got them there, so she's constantly having to look at them. And it's really funny because sometimes she's like, okay, I'm going to wear these bracelets today. And she's starting to become more and more aware of that. From the day she was born, I can say, who are you? Oh, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm created in God's image. She can repeat all of those Bible verses to you. She's still working on believing them. And so we have to figure out other strategies to help these kids be able to do that. All right. Go ahead, next slide, Dina. So we're shaped by our experiences, and so we really we have an opportunity, and as the younger we can help shape those experiences, the more we can help these kids be successful. And I'm not neglecting that some of us experience trauma as adults or complex trauma as adults, but a lot of these same strategies will help us as well. So we are generally set up to be prepared that we're either in a world that's dangerous and it's not safe at all, or a world that's safe and nurturing. And kids who are in safe, nurturing environments can still believe that the world is dangerous. And so we're really wanting to help shift that worldview. Okay. I already went through a lot of these risk factors for trauma, but for the kids, it's prenatal risk, it's perinatal risk, maltreatment, neglect. Neglect is one of the biggest, because what neglect says is that you don't matter. I don't see you. And so if you know that you've got a foster family in your church, or you've got somebody who has a child who's experienced neglect, know that that's going to be one of the more challenging. Sometimes we think physical abuse is more challenging, and it's not. neglect really is. And so know that that family could probably use a whole lot more support and a whole lot more loving arms coming alongside and helping them with that. Okay, there's the systems effects and the natural man-made traumas. So it's a variety of things that can really impact kids. And we've got an increase of developmental trauma because of the pandemic. So we have a lot of kids right now that their brains are wired a little bit differently and they have a whole lot that they are dealing with. Okay, next slide. So really quick, we're gonna take a quick look at the brain. This YouTube, when you get the handouts, this is a great little YouTube. It's about 20 minutes that talks about the downstairs and upstairs brain and what some of these kids experience. So if you want to know more, you can go to that and take a look at that. Okay, so here's our brain. I talked a little bit about the upstairs and downstairs brain, but realizing that frontal lobe, keeping that upstairs brain engaged is what's going to make a difference for these kids. And here's why, if you go to the next slide. The brainstem we talked about is safety. The other system we haven't talked about is your limbic system, which is also in that part of your upstairs brain, and that's all your emotions and emotional regulation. So some of these kids don't regulate their emotions. Correct. Some of you laugh. Some of these kids, so how we learn to regulate, right? You're a little baby, you have a hard time regulating, and so we do, as a parent, we do a lot of the regulating for our kids. I'm a big proponent of you wear your kids when you're a parent, because we know that if their blood pressure goes high or low, your blood pressure will go higher, will go the opposite direction to help normalize theirs. Or if their heart rate goes up, your heart rate will go down to bring theirs down, or body temperature and so forth. So there's a lot of connection. And so like when Rebecca came home, she actually went from the neonatal intensive care unit to what's called PIC. It's an intermediate center for children who've been exposed to drugs and alcohol. But their philosophy is you don't touch, you just kind of let them kind of go through their withdrawals, all right? So I bring this baby home she was a month old at the time and didn't really know how to manage the world unless she was just left in a corner. But she didn't really like that either. And so I wore her all the time, and a lot of times skin to skin. She was under my shirt, tied up tight next to me, so that she could learn how to start to interact with others and with the world. People were like, "Oh, so lucky, you've got a baby. If she's upset, you just lay her down and she cries it out." But she wasn't self-soothing and crying it out. She was really in distress. And so you may, as you start having some of these families come in, especially if you have foster families, I know, for me at our church, I was really involved with the church. I was everybody's auntie. I had kids around me all the time. I love kids. I walk into church with a baby, and people are like, "Oh, please, I want," and I had to be, "Sorry, you can't touch her right now. She needs to be with me. We'll get there, but not yet," right? And I had to learn. I actually would put my whatever I was going to wear that day with the baby on. I'd get to the car. When I got to church, I took and would put her in it because, oh, thank you, so that people would, not because I didn't want people to touch her, but so that she could develop and grow. So we first regulate for them, and then we start moving to what's called co-regulation. So we help them be able to regulate themselves, but we also are helping to regulate with them. Some of our kids need co-regulation, some of these kids with these developmental trauma, into early adulthood, all right? And we'll go, "Oh no, they should be independent by elementary." They can't. They need that continual growth. And honestly, we all still co-regulate, right? I have a good friend here, Becky, And I had a really tough day about a week and a half ago. I called her and I said, I'm bringing you a coffee and I need a hug. All right? Co-regulation. And so we do it. We just have other ways. But for some of our kids with trauma, they're going to need it even more. And so you want to think about ways that you're going to be providing some of that support for them. Okay, and then that executive thinking. We also know that their left, it's okay, keep going, yep. No, next one. Their left and right hemispheres are a little bit different. So people with trauma their left hemisphere is stronger than their right. So they struggle a lot with their emotions, sensations, a lot of that type of thing, where they can be really linear and logical. And so sometimes you have to be linear and logical to get to the emotional side for them. So think about that when you're starting to introduce them to Jesus and to God. If we only talk to them about an emotional, loving God, they're not going to understand that. We have to start with some of the logical and some of the, so I'll give an example. At kids camp a couple of years ago, I did a couple sessions for the kids all around their bodies and sensation, and particularly for kids with ADD, ADHD. And I brought brain models. And I had a bunch of little boys. Henry was one of them. So Henry and his group of little boys, I had all of them. And people were like, oh, you're going to have them for a whole hour? What are you going to do? I'm like, we'll be fine. We took that brain apart, and we talked about the downstairs brain, their amygdala, and their upstairs brain. And we talked about how, you guys are getting older. You're going to have to figure out some strategies to do with your amygdala. And I don't remember which little boy said this, but he goes, you mean it's not my fault that I do this? And I'm like, so linear, logical. No. And God didn't desire that this be a challenge for you, but because there's sin in the world, things happen. But God has some strategies that can help you because he loves you so much. Link the linear, the logical, bring them to who God is and how God is loving and caring. And these little boys had so much fun for a whole hour going, oh, this helps my amygdala. Well, it doesn't help my amygdala. And they're talking about their amygdalas and talking about, and it was a great session. And I had a crazy year last year, and they were like, well, you're going to do that session. I'm like, I'm not doing it this last year. And I had a couple of the little boys coming up to me at camp last year going, didn't you bring your brains? I'm like, okay. But these are things for us to be thinking about as we start to work with this population, as we start to bring them in. Okay, next slide. So just another thing to think about when you're, especially if you're thinking about Sunday school or kids camp or different things. Kids with trauma, notice where most of their attention is. It's in that survival and regulation. I want to survive, and I got to be good. I got to be good. I can't do this. I got to be good. Right? They're trying to stay regulated. So one of the things I love doing at kids camp is when we have chapel. And one of the things that we do is worship is fun and crazy at kids camp. So these kids are like this, right? They're bouncing off the walls and they're ready to go. Oh, now we want you to sit down and sit still and listen to somebody talk to you. Okay, that works for some kids, and for the rest of the kids, they're under the chairs, they're up above, they're doing all. So we do a little break in between where we give them some strategies to regulate their body so then they can listen. And a couple of years ago, one of the speaker for kids camp, he goes, so then I shouldn't rev them back up during my talk. I go, no, it's okay. We can bring them up, but some of these kids can't bring themselves back down. That's that co-regulation. So we need to use the strategies to help calm them back down. So you've got a great worship time. You dismiss them. They go into Sunday school. You probably don't want to immediately start with a lesson, but start with some other strategies, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes to bring them back, to help them be able to hear that lesson. Again, I've talked a lot about this. Survival brain, critical, negative, high drama. They personalize everything. They're overwhelmed. Particularly Rebecca. if there's been a bunch of stuff going on at school, she can come home and she will tell me how everybody's feeling, or the so-and-so teacher was all upset, because she's so tuned in to everybody else. Not necessarily to herself, but to everybody else. And so if there's a lot of drama, then she's all cattywampus, because she's trying to figure out, how do I fit within this drama? What does it do to me? People don't like me, all those kinds of things. She doesn't have kind of that optimistic, or being able to go, oh yeah, that was really funny, or, she doesn't. We have to work on that, and we're still talking a lot about that. She's old enough now, we've actually sat down and talked through some of these types of things. But with our younger kids, they're not going to understand that. We're going to have to share that with them in different ways. Okay. So impact of trauma is on it's on relationships. It's on it's on the physical body, it's emotional, spiritual, developmental, and cognitive, academic. Some of these parents, and I want to pause, and I know we're going to talk mostly about kids, but I really want to talk about family and parents as a whole, because some of these parents are struggling with, my kid doesn't love me. There's even a whole group in the foster care world that I'm a part of, not because I'm experiencing this, but because as a professional, I want to support these families, that they call blocked care, where some of these parents are like, I don't love my kid. What do I do? And really having to help support some of them. So as a church, if this is something you're bringing in, some of you may be going, I'm not going to do Sunday school. I'm not going to work with the kid. Pray about, and how can you support the parent? Can you take them a meal? Can you set up a time where they can go and do, one of the activities at the little jumping place? What's it called? Catapult. Anyway, but go there with them, or and maybe even you go with them so you can sit and talk to the mom while the child is doing something else. And so one of the things is, we talk a little bit about where you guys could go, how this would look as a church. Everybody's going to have a little bit different that you can offer, that you can do. And so it's not that everybody's going to work one-on-one with the kids. Maybe what it is that the parent just needs. I remember when my kids were younger, and I was just like, I am so overwhelmed, and single parent, 2 kids, 2 years apart, lots of needs. And I got this phone call from the foster agency, and they're like, oh, we have this church that wants to come and spend a day working in somebody's yard. Would you be interested? I'm like, oh, yeah. And they just came and just cleaned up my yard for spring cleaning. And that just took enough stress away that we were able to move on. So as we're talking and praying, I just want to challenge you to think about, it doesn't mean, when we're talking about how to support the kids, that you have to be with the kids. It could be supporting the parent. It could be whatever God lays on your heart, because I think it takes a community and all of us being involved in different ways. Okay, so as we start thinking about these kids, what they really need is a secure base and a safe haven. So secure base, they can go out and explore. Safe haven means they can come back to you and check in with you. And we do want to start working towards health and healing for them. So I was telling Daisy, it was so fun when I walked in here. As I was walking in, Henry's walking out. So Henry and I have done a lot of stuff. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but I work with a lot of families and kids, and I was not Henry's therapist, but Daisy's friend. So Henry and I have had a lot of conversations. And I was like, hi, Henry. And he was like, hi. Oh, hi. Huge hug. Safe haven, right? We haven't seen each other for a while, but it's a safe haven. And so we want to be that. So, Heather, I've watched her at kids camp. She's a safe haven for some of those kids. And they just adored her. And I remember her first year at kid camp. She's like, Yvonne, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh my gosh, Yvonne, my cabin's not even decorated. What am I going to do? I'm like, we'll get you some decorations. We're going to... At the end of that week, those kids adored her. She was a safe haven, right? And so when God calls, when God it prompts you to do those things, then you can respond, and you're going to be one of those people. And who knows, maybe it's going to be only one time. Maybe they're going to keep coming back to you. Maybe you're going to be that grandma at the church that they just come and get a big hug and then they run off. We used to have a woman at our church named Rosemary Lambert. My kids, every time, would go give her a big hug. They'd get their little piece of candy, and they were just, Rosemary loves me, right? And so praying and really thinking about what does it mean to have a secure base, safe haven, and don't underestimate how God might use you in that. All right. One more thing, just as we move on, of kind of that worldview, and I've been talking a lot about that. Some of our kids with trauma do have nurturing, stable relationships and attachment at home, but it's hard for them outside of the home. And so they need to be able to develop some of that outside of the home as well, and know where some of those safe places are, because that helps overcome the basic mistrust that they have. And really being able to build that sense of it's not hopeless. I really have something that I can offer and I can do within this world. All right. So trauma in the church. So I did a little bit of research, and I was in tears. One study found that both the religious and non-religious respondents who experienced any kind of childhood trauma were less likely to describe God as loving, always present, and forgiving. I was like, okay, God, what do we do? How do we do this? How do we help them see and understand this? How do we help? And you layer generational curses and all of those kinds of things on that. My oldest, when she was a baby, and I'd go in at night sometimes to pray over her, I'd lay my hand on her, and even in her sleep, she'd roll away. Or I'd be at church and somebody would reach over to pray for her, and I could feel her shift away. She was just a baby. But there's those things in there that however we want to frame it, look at it, but God wants to heal them from that so that they can come back to the Lord. And it's really fun. She's 20. She's like, Mom, I'm reading my Bible. I'm pretty cool, isn't it, hun? Right? You know, it's been up and down, and she's learned, but really now starting to see that God is loving and caring and taking care of her and guiding her. And it's a journey. And it's a journey for biological kids too. So, but I'm just saying that we really need to help these kids see what it means to have a loving God who's always present and who is forgiving, and how we extend some of that and share some of that with them. So healthy relationships are the key with that. You'll hear me as we move into this. One of the things in my trauma training, and when I'm working a lot with families, they'll hear me say this over and over again: connection before correction. So we're so good as adults, right? Rachel, you did it again. You really need to stop. We've had this conversation several times, right? Remember, the trauma brain's already negatively inclined, and we come at them like that. They're already, okay, I did it again. I blew it. I screwed up. We want to connect. And we want to, okay, how are you? Where are you? How does this fit? It takes more time, but it's worth it because it helps bring healing to these kids. We're the body of Christ, and they're part of the body of Christ. So how are we going to help bring them to that health and healing? A few scriptures to be thinking about. The Lord's close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed. And we talk a lot in our family sometimes. You may not feel this, but it's the truth, and that's what faith is. And so now how do we walk in faith to this? And really, how does this look like? Sometimes we've done different things in stages in our family kind of journey through all of this. I'd write verses like this on the mirror, so as they're getting ready in the morning, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, right? So those things are starting to get in, and they're starting to hear and think through some of those things. Okay. So what can we do? Before we go to that, you guys just got a fire hose of about what could be like a 2-week lesson on brain and trauma and stuff. Any questions or thoughts? You still here? I didn't lose you. Okay. Okay. And we'll come back. You know, Rachel and I've talked. We'll come back. We'll probably have more times where we can talk a little bit more clinical. We can talk a little bit more spiritual. This is kind of hopefully an overview and big picture. So what can we do? Yeah.
So maybe there are some adults like myself in this room who come from complex
Mm-hmm.
trauma, who seeing those lists, that big list up there, are like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here trying to talk about loving our kids and caring for them well, and maybe there's some fear of, if I'm still experiencing these things, how can I love kids well if I'm still struggling with this? What would you say to that?
Well, I will say, I think you can. And I think it's a lie from the pit of hell that would say you've been through these things so you can't. And I'm going to point out my friend Becky over here, who used to teach at the school where Rebecca was. Rebecca was having a really rough day one day. She's on the phone to me. A teacher is like coming at her. You need to stop this. You need to do this. You need to, right? And so she's fully in her downstairs brain and in flight or freeze, but she can't move anywhere. And I hear in the background, Yvonne, it's Miss Rogers. I got her. Hang up the phone. So I hang up. And I pick her up from the car, and I said, how did the rest of the day go? She goes, well, Miss Rogers came and we went on a trauma walk. So I think that God brings people into your lives that understand, and sometimes kids need to know that you've experienced some of these things. One of the conferences that I used to be involved in was called the Refresh Conference. It was a lot of foster parents, and and one of the times you walked in, we got this little sign that said "Me Too." And so when we were in big meetings and people were sharing things, so like we'd be sharing about this complex trauma and everybody talking about it, and if somebody was kind of sharing their story, but you'd experienced it too, you would hold up this "Me Too" sign, right? So thousands of foster parents. And this woman in the front of the room gets up and she starts talking about her struggles as a foster mom and her sense of feeling as a failure and all of these things. And as she's talking, and she's like, I got so depressed, I had to take antidepressants and all of these things. And she was just like, I just can't do this because I can't minister to my kids because I have all of this. And as she finished, they said, now turn around. And as she turned around, and you could just see her go from dejection to like, oh my gosh, because there were just a whole bunch of Me Too signs. And so I think, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, and I'll share I'll just do it now. I think that part of our opportunity within this, and as a church, we don't share our brokenness enough. And in not sharing our brokenness, other people don't get to see what God does. And in don't sharing our healing journey, we don't get to see what God does. And I was praying a lot about this over the last few months, and God gave me this illustration, and I'm going to put this down for a minute. He said, we are like glow sticks. Here's our glow stick. It's nothing, right? But as it's broken, we start to show our light. And you shake, and you might have to break them a couple times, and all of a sudden there's light, right? If every single person here was sharing, as the Lord leads, I'm not saying let's barf all of our dirty laundry on everybody, but as the Lord leads, if we're sharing our brokenness and we're allowing it to be broken, and then we're sharing our light, people are going to be drawn to that. And so that's what I would say. We're all broken in different ways. We've all experienced trauma, some different than others. An experience that might not be very traumatic for one person could be super traumatic, the same experience, super traumatic for another. But this is my vision. I want to see us be able to show our light and draw people here. And some of that comes from recognizing some of our brokenness, and you and I've talked about that. You've got a heart for this because of what you've experienced, right? So you can then share some of that and bring hope and healing. So, okay, we can go to the next slide. So this also ties right in with what Rachel just talked about. The first thing you need to take some time doing as a church, as you guys are thinking about this, is what about you? And in some of my training, and if I was doing a whole big, this is a piece of a big, long course on becoming more trauma-informed. But one of the things they had us do is, what's in your bucket? Your bucket is your needs, right? And what's in your bucket are your needs that are being met, and outside of your bucket are the needs that are not being met. And what we want to do is be able to say, okay, God, if you've got tons of needs not being met, it's going to be really hard to help meet some of the needs of others. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect before you can work with others, but spend some time as you move into working, God, where's my bucket? What are some of my needs? What if you start working and doing some of this and you get triggered if you've experienced some trauma? And it might happen, right? You've maybe been a parent of a child with ADD, ADHD, and a kid comes in here with some of the similar behaviors as your child, and all of a sudden you're just like, oh my gosh, right? So what's the need? What needs to happen so that need is being met, so it's in that bucket and safe, versus being out there that makes it difficult? And some of the things for me that's helped with some of that is asking him for his heart. So when I'm working with a kid, as a therapist, I've had some kids I don't like, right? And I'm like, oh Lord, right? I'm like, okay, as I'm doing therapy with them, underneath in the back, I'm like, God, show me your heart, show me how you see them. Show me the need. Help me have their heart, your heart for them. So that's been a big thing for me. How to replace some of the lies with truth, right? This kid is hopeless. That's not the truth. The truth is every individual on this planet is here for a purpose. And my heart is to hear God's heart so that I can help to speak that purpose into them. And, and so starting to, those lies, our society has a whole lot. This kid is hopeless. And there's another great TED Talk I can send you guys to. They did this huge study on these kids that been in foster care, and the ones that were really successful versus the ones that didn't do really well. And the number one thing was hope. So when you think about this as a church, and you think about what Jesus gives us, is helping for them to have hope and see that hope. And who am I, and what has God created me to be? And I can have a job, and I can do this, and what am I good at? And speaking those things into these kids. Even sometimes when you're kind of like, I don't know if I want, how do I do that? God, help me do some of that. And then learning how for ourselves to continue to walk in freedom, to continue to have our needs put into that bucket, but also that we help others be able to walk within that. So I'm always thinking about, okay, how do I do that? Okay, Lord, what are some of the lies that I'm believing? And because I've noticed sometimes, especially as a parent, and maybe some of you others as parents have experienced some of this, if I start believing a lie and kind of getting, my kids start acting, I'm like, seriously, why are you guys acting like this? I'm having a hard time. You shouldn't be acting like this. You're supposed to be helping me. Nope, right? And so, okay, Lord, I repent, and I'm back on my knees. Okay, God, what do I need to do? How do I need to respond? What are the things that you're calling me to learn and walk through? Okay. So, and then the next thing was the brokenness. Are we willing to share our brokenness? Are we willing to say, I've walked this road with you, or I've walked this road myself, let me walk with you? Sometimes it might be, I've walked this road, it's really hard, I can't walk right next to you right now, but here's somebody else, right? So, And so we can sometimes, because if you've walked through some of this trauma, you recognize it in other people. And then you want to step out and help them. But if you're not healed and ready yet, it's going to create more challenges for you. And it's okay to say, God's still working in me, but here's somebody else. You can still pray for them. You can still be friendly with them. But you might not be able to walk hand in hand yet until there's some healing. Okay. Some other things that we know from trauma-informed programs, organizations, and systems that and this is, kind of what we're working towards, recognizing the widespread effect of trauma and understands potential paths for healing. So that's part of what we're doing today. And then recognizing signs and symptoms of some of the traumas, and we're sharing some of that today. And then the next 3 and 4, I think, is some of what Rachel's really praying about and working with John and Gina and thinking about, but responding by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into your policies, procedures, and practices. What's that going to look like for you? And so I'm going to be sharing some strategies, but it might be that you go, this doesn't work within the context of who we are as a body. That's okay. Because really what we need is more than one church in Tacoma willing to step up and deal with some of this. And then different churches are going to have, I believe, will have some different emphases because we can't all do it all. And so what has God called you as a body to do? And then seek to actively resist re-traumatization. So actively resisting some of those lies that our society tells us that causes some of that re-traumatization. So here's what we're looking at. How do we incorporate into the church these kinds of principles? Safety. And when I'm talking about safety, there's a difference between we're all safe right now, right? We can all look here and we know, something funky could happen, but basically we're safe. Everybody trusts everybody, or at least generally knows people. But there's a difference between that knowledge of safety and what's called felt safety. Felt safety is you can know that you're safe, but you don't feel safe. And that can be from emotions, it can be from some of the trauma. So we want to create not just the sense that, okay, it's safe, but that sense of felt safety too. This is a place I can come in and start letting some of my guard down. Because as we let our guard down, then God can heal. If somebody it doesn't have that felt safety, they come in here, even though it's safe, and they have all their guards and everything's up, it's going to be hard for God to really get to their heart and do some healing. Trustworthiness and transparency, so sharing. And again, though, being sensitive within the context of that. When I'm saying that, it doesn't mean you tell everything to everybody, but that you're wise within that. So with our kids, we want to share some of that. Thinking about peer support and mutual self-help, we can't do it on our own. Right? I have people with some of the stuff that our family has walked through and stuff. I have people, all I have to do is text is pray. I don't have to text them details. I don't have to say anything else. Just I can get my prayer support going. But having some things set up. So it might be, again, when I was saying not all of you would be foster parents, or not all of you might not work, but it could be that one of you is willing to say, you know what, if you're having a really rough time, give me a call. I'm willing to take your kid for a half an hour, or take them out for a coffee, or take them for a walk, or do whatever. Pray. How does God want to build some of that peer support and mutual self-help? Collaboration, empowerment. So as we was talking about the kids, I know you've got some of the kids here. I mean, Henry and I've had lots of discussions. When I've talked with Henry a couple times about, well, here's some things that might help you. I'll sit there and I'll get stuff out and he'll go, nope, that won't help me. I'm like, okay, well, how about this, Henry? Nope, don't like that either. Okay, well, what do you think about this one? I'll think about it. Okay, but we want to give voice and have some discussion because we want to help them build some of those strategies. So there's times Henry's been at my house, we've had half my tools out on the floor, and he's like, I'm going to try that one, just that one. What about this one that you said might help? Nope, don't even want to take it. Okay, all right, right? But then there's times he's like, that other thing, that blue thing, can I try it? So it's having things available, but giving them some voice within the context of it. And then again, thinking about cultural, historical, or some of those gender issues. And we can talk about that down the road, but those are other things I think as a church we need to be thinking about and really does fit within this whole conversation. Okay, so here's some things for you guys to be considering. Some really deliberate planning, and Rachel and I have been talking a lot about this. And bite size. I love, and I'll pick on Rachel a little bit, she is a big picture thinker. So she's got you guys 10 years down the road, okay, which is great, but you have to bring it to here and now and then those steps. So I'm looking, so some really deliberate planning. How does it fit within the mission of the church and your goals? Okay, and if you're doing this for yourself as a family, saying, okay, how are we going to fit within this? I'd encourage you to do the same thing. What's your family mission statement? How does it fit within your family and within your goals? You know, part of our family mission statement is that we are constantly involved with the foster care system. My girls are like, Mom, it's been a year since we've had a foster baby in the home. I'm like, yeah. I've been a little overwhelmed. I think it'll be another year. And they're like, oh, no. So, yeah, we did first aid yesterday so that we can start having those babies in for respite, huh? Rebecca would probably take yours for a while. So, but right, so that we can help with some of that and work on how it fits within our family. Are we doing long-term foster care? Nope. My girls were convinced we should. And last Christmas, there was an emergency, and we had a family unit of 3. We had 3 kids placed in our home, like literally overnight. One with significant behavior disorders, one with significant ADD that they hadn't been getting his meds for I don't know how long, and one on the spectrum. Okay? Ranging from, I think it was 6 to 13. Luckily, my friend Claire was visiting, so I had an extra adult in the house. And but they kept going, oh, one more week. And I finally, the girls were like, oh, Mom, we can do it. This is great. I'm like, I'm dying. This is not so great. I'm going back to work by then, and now I'm having to get 5 kids to school in different places. And we finally had to sit down and talk, and I said, I know we love these kids because we had known them for a long time. I said, but we're not helping them when we're getting so tired. And our mission statement is to be a respite for babies, to be a respite for some of the younger kids. And it was really hard. We had to say no, and they had to go somewhere else, which was not too far from us, and they kept showing up at our door. And we're like, did your foster family? No, we told them we were going for a walk. Okay, you can't just show up, right? And we had to really work at some of that. And then they call and they were like, okay, we're splitting the kids up. Can you take one? And we had to sit down as a family and pray again. Our mission is to take respite, not right now to do ongoing long term. And it's okay. And I had to learn because, and this is one of the things the Lord showed me at that time. It's okay to say no so you can do well with your yeses, right? And I'm one of those people that, oh, okay, there's a need, okay, oh, there's a need, okay, right? This is an area with a lot of needs. And so your church needs to know your mission statement and your goals with this, and we need you as each family unit or individuals need to know your mission statement and your goal within the context of that. It's okay to start slow. And if you start building this, I can tell you there's a high need. People are going to start showing up. And so it's better to start slow. If you know other churches are doing a similar type of thing, it's a good idea to talk with them so that you're able to do well what God has given you instead of all of a sudden just have an avalanche and really be struggling with some of this. build a common language and understanding. So some of that reframing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about reframing behavior and a couple things. Yeah.
Oh, no,
Okay.
I was just gonna, this is really short.
Uh-huh.
There was a time I dabbled with foster care and stuff like that, and just, but within the system, like earlier when you were talking, there is a prejudice and a discrimination. See, of course, you go in like you don't know what's going on, and you want to be a good person, And even in there, they divide the kids in half, and they have what they got the Shirley Temple and the Davy Crockett kids. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
the kid, like when you're in a healthy married family, you're hoping when your baby's born, he's one of them. And I said, what's the other ones? Well, that's what we call the damaged kids. Well, who
Yeah.
are they? Well, that's anybody that's born disabled or is born a baby with trauma or
Mm-hmm.
because the mother hated the father, the baby has failure to thrive. So everything you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
to be short. So then I thought, well, why am I here then as a foster parent? And then they thought I'd be really good. And I'm going to tell you, what was my problem as a person turned out to be a blessing for these kids. I am dysfunctional, but I'm highly dysfunctional. And the kids they were giving me were damaged. So like when they're saying this, I'm like, well, aren't these? I thought these was the normal kids,
Mm-hmm.
And that's this, like, you fit in perfect with them. Because I'm actually like, even though I am a legal adult, that basically I'm like this great big dysfunctional kid, and something like that what the damaged kids would do that would flip out a normal person, it's like, oh, I thought everybody's like that. But but they're
Yeah.
not like that.
Yeah.
It was from these kids I learned that I'm actually different from everybody. But that's
Yeah.
another story. But yeah, I'm highly dysfunctional. And if you don't believe me, you can ask her. She's like, what?
Oh no, she's not.
Okay,
I think.
that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
being dysfunctional, really, it was really good for the kids and it was good for
And
me
I think
because
that's
we
why
could
God
get
put me
along.
with him,
Mm-hmm.
to
That's
be honest.
Yeah.
that's when you get into the long-term care where you have
Yeah.
until they turn 18 kind of thing.
Well, I
So
think
I wanted to say.
that's that whole piece of reframing, right? That's that whole piece of reframing that I was just going to talk about, in that we can reframe, and these kids aren't damaged. These kids had a rough start, but God sees them whole and healed and has a plan for them. And what we're starting to realize, there's a whole bunch of reframing happening in our society as a whole around, if you've heard the term neurodivergent, right? And I would argue that we're all neurodivergent. And we all, some more so than others, but some of these things, and this is part of those stories that these kids need to see and hear, is that, okay, it's okay. Yep, you're a little bit different, but that's all right. God has a plan and desires to use you. And in his kingdom, we're all children of the Most High King. And we're all sinners saved by grace. And so how do we help reframe some of that? Thinking about some of the current neuro research and how it lines up with the body, you're right. You didn't have good connection. But you know what? That's why the Bible talks about the body of Christ and why we need to be at church and why we need to connect and why we need to be part of the Bible, part of the body. But really starting to bring some of those truths together, helping them learn scriptures, helping them see who they can be, and really bringing in a strong biblical foundation. And really, who are you, and why are you, and really starting to bring some of that purpose, which goes to that whole sense of hope, right? Because God gives us hope. And so we can help them to hear and teach them how to hear God's voice and have that sense for hope. Having some honest communication among yourselves and listening to each other. What is this going to mean? What's it going to look like for us? And thinking about supportive strategies. Listen to some of your parents that are walking in and some of the things that they're struggling with, or what's really hard for them. And you might not be able to solve it, but sometimes even just listening can help. Okay. as we move into talking about kids, I know we've talked a lot about trauma, but I just want to link that a lot of these strategies that we're going to talk about now also work for kids with ADD, ADHD, kids who are on the spectrum, kids with behavior challenges, all the different types of challenges that kids may have. So a lot of these principles work well across all kids. Okay. And I'm reminding you again, we're at trauma awareness and trauma sensitivity, getting to that point of being trauma responsive and really being able to be trauma informed. That you guys are heading there. But I guess what I'm saying is I would not go out after this training and start talking, oh, our church is a trauma informed church. Because you could end up with a whole bunch of people really fast. I would say our church is really learning about trauma, and we're seeking to find out how we can best meet the needs and really be honest that you're still seeking how to bring some principles and bring some things into place. Because what you don't want is a family to come here and think, oh, this church has it all, and then then they get re-traumatized because they're like, oh, they're not trauma informed. So really bringing some of that in. Okay, so trauma lens. We're going to shift. One of the things is shifting the paradigm. And hopefully with some of the information that I've just shared with you, now this kind of makes sense. Instead of what's wrong with this person, we start to want to say, what has this person been through? Or starting to look at the positive intent around some of their behaviors. That was one thing that my friend Becky, she's like, Yvonne, think positive intent. And there's times I'm like looking at my girls going, what's the positive intent here? Right? But really thinking that way and thinking towards that for them. Okay. Looking also through the lens of attachment versus behavior management. Our society is set up for how can we manage the behavior? We need to manage this behavior. We need to change the behavior, right? Behavior's not going to change without connection. It's not going to change without some of that attachment. And so, and it might take a long time because some of these kids, that behavior is an adaptive strategy that allows them to manage their trauma. So if you extinguish the behavior without creating the connection and the attachment, just a new maladaptive behavior is going to crop up because they need the behavior in order to manage their world. Does that make sense? And that's really important to understand. And so it's shifting our lens from this sense of behavior management to how do we build connection, helping that limbic system regulate, and then help to reframe what that behavior might look like. Now, I work with some kids on the spectrum that have some pretty significant, what we would call self-stimulatory behaviors. I call them self-regulatory behaviors because they need them to be regulated. But we work with them that some of their behaviors they know they can do at home, and then they don't do it at church, say. But those are steps that you work towards, and so we want to figure out some strategies and some adaptive ways to help support their behavior instead of just going, oh, this child's a behavior problem, there's nothing we can do, right? We want to help build some resilience. And so resilience is bad things happen. So a lot of individuals with trauma brain, particularly our kids, as soon as one bad thing happens, they're done, right? But you can't always just be done. Now, there might be times that we might start that way, but we've got to start building resilience. You're right. But you can't just give up every time something's hard. We're going to have to figure out how to work with that or how to overcome that. But that's hard. It's so hard for them. And so, and sometimes a lot of it comes through modeling because these kids, you can't talk to tons. If you talk too much, they just kind of shut down, okay? So resilience can be learned, and that happens through connections, routines. So something to be thinking about is a real set routine for how, if you're teaching a Sunday school class and you have these kids, I would have a set routine for how your Sunday school class runs, right? If you're going to change the routine, you warn them ahead of time. So at camp last year, there was a young girl on the spectrum, and at kids' camp, for breakfast, all the cabin leaders get to go somewhere else and have their time and a little bit of break from their kids. And so we knew there's this young girl, and so my daughter, Rebecca, is like, Rebecca, you're on so-and-so. And so the cabin leaders could go. And so she was on her, she was working with her, nope, this is what you do, this is how you do it. And so comes the next morning and she's like, oh, okay, I'm on so-and-so. I'm like, nope, you're supporting her this time. I want you just to stand back and watch, but if she does, and if she needs help, you jump in, you know, don't let her go from the group or whatever. So she did that. I was helping her a little bit with it, and the kiddo was pretty successful. By the end of camp, she could do the whole breakfast routine by herself, right? That's what we want. And so we want the set routine, we want the supports, but we're working towards that child developing their own skills. And camp's a great place to learn it, because she could still spill the cereal and nobody cared because we were outside and it was, you know. So there was some grace within the context of that, but she was doing it by herself. And instead of going, you know, far, far away from her group, she would be and doing something, she'd be like within a foot of them and still spinning or doing her thing, but she didn't, you could go, where's your group? Right here. Where at the beginning of camp, where's your group? I don't, you know. So that's what we want to build. So having routine starts building that for these kids, and then we start bringing it in more and more so that they can be successful with that. Looking for opportunities of self-discovery. All of these types of things help build resilience, and I think it's a place where we as a church can help build some of this for the kids that are here. It also is having resilient adults. Remember, these kids are really black and white. Remember, we talked about brain. So we sometimes have to model the gray for them. So you didn't come really prepared for Sunday school. You had a really busy week. You're kind of winging it. So sometimes we want to cover all that up. One of the things we can do to help build resilience is you walk in, you go, boy, kids, I had a really rough week. I'm not as planned as I hoped to be. So I'm trying to think through how we're going to work this through. And all that internal thoughts that you're doing to organize it, make it, instead of implicit, make it explicit. So they see your resilience and how you encountered and used that, and that models for them how they can do that. Does that make sense? It's a vulnerability on our part, but it's really one thing that we can do to help them learn some of that. And again, attachment and nurturing relationships. If all you are is a Rosemary who gives a kid a hug and a piece of candy when they come in, that's huge. Because that attachment, there's people that care about me. There's people that seek me out, those types of things. Building social connections, so helping them have some connections. I've heard about the group here that is doing the music with the kids. What a great example of that, right? And building some of those connections. Sorry, just a sec. Reagan's texting. Do you want to see what she needs? Meeting some of their basic needs, learning how they, learning about how the children grow, and then building social and emotional skills. So modeling some of that, and sometimes saying, "Hey, this is okay, but why don't we do this?" Okay, all right. Some additional strategies, and we're going to talk through each of these a little bit, and hopefully give you some ideas. So first, we're going to look at reconceptualizing behavior. We're going to talk about some sensory, because that's the biggest thing we can do if we can give them some sensory supports, some accommodations, coping skills, and then play. We know that a lot of learning happens through play, and we're not doing enough in our society. Things are becoming way too structured. So remember, I just said have a routine for your Sunday school, but you're going to also hear me say, build in some play, build in some unstructured time where kids can really experiment